welcome everyone to Art of Advisory. My name is Hector Garcia, and I'm with my co-host, Kirk Bowman. Hey, Kirk, how are you?
Hey, Hector. Welcome to April.
Yes, April. I love April because it's so much closer to ending of the panic season that we discussed
Yes.
last. All right, so we wanted to discuss a topic that's pretty ubiquitous throughout. I think everybody will kind of connect with what we're going to talk about today. And I don't think we're going to talk about any new concepts. I think almost everything we'll talk about is pretty much stuff that everybody knows and it's obvious. But I think it's until you kind of sit down and discuss it and analyze it that you may realize where maybe you may be missing some of the things that are obviously sitting in front of you regarding this whole concept of timing. So we talked about, in a couple of episodes ago, we talked about response time and that being such an important piece of the engagement with your customers. You know, what the response time is going to be, what the response time is you're going to promise, and if and when the response time actually plays a role into the way the engagement is or the way the engagement is priced. And we actually kind of said to each other, hey, we can dedicate a whole episode to response time. So this would be that episode, I would say. And then maybe we can dig deeper also into the whole concept of timing from the perspective of both parties. What do you think, Kirk?
Works for me. I think there's more that falls under this category than meets the eye or meets the ear. So I don't think we're going to have any trouble.
So I'll start with a philosophical concept, and then maybe we'll debate a little bit about this. So my take on this, philosophically speaking, is that I believe time in itself is sort of the great equalizer. It is the one thing that everyone can agree on. I mean, I would say regardless of where you stand philosophically or politically or whatever, you know, we at least agree on dates and time, right? So we're sort of all bound by the same rules. I believe maybe some people enjoy the time more or enjoy it less. And for some people, maybe time passes slower or faster from their perspective. But in a whole, time is pretty solid. It's something that's not really open to interpretation. So I think timing is important because it is the great equalizer. The other piece is timing, something that I always thought, again, very philosophically, our time left on Earth, right? The time that we are left as alive human beings is also something that each person cherishes very deeply. So the concept of wasting time or not doing something that it's fulfilling with that time is something that everybody fears. Therefore, there's other business concepts like opportunity cost and stuff like that, where it's actually a lot more concrete, and you have all these adages like time is money and things like that, which are, we can get into discussions about whether that's accurate or not. But I would say that's kind of like, philosophically speaking, where I want to start. Kirk, do you have any thoughts about the whole concept of time being the same for everybody or different? What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're exactly right. Time, first of all, can mean different things to different people, and therefore it can have a different context. So probably the first thing we want to do is really define the context that we're talking about. You already hinted at it, which is really timing, which is different than time. Time is a finite resource. We all have a certain amount. We're born, and we have the moments from the time we're born until the time we die. Now, we don't know exactly when we're going to die, but we know that everybody does. In fact, you probably heard the old cliche, the only two things that are certain are death and taxes, speaking of which we are in panic season, where timing can be important to both customers, and it's going to wind up being important to the IRS coming up here in about 10 days or so. So I think we need to define it. I first want to talk about what we're not talking about, which is time. In other words, time spent on a project. That's not what we're talking about. And of course, that could lead us down a rabbit hole of talking about billing by the hour and timesheets, and that's not where we're going. We're really talking about response time. I guess you could really package this. It's really customer service. speaking of time, I want to throw out a different definition that I think is more applicable to our discussion, which is time is duration. This idea that regardless of how much effort it's going to take, we have to make a commitment to the customer of when something's going to be delivered, when it's going to be ready, when a project is going to end. And so a project may wind up being 4 weeks, 4 months. That doesn't mean we're going to spend all of that, quote, time on their project. It simply means that given the other commitments we have, the other customers we're serving, etc., that is when we can deliver to them. And so this episode is really not about time, but it's about duration. When do we say we're going to deliver something to the customer?
Right. And, we can safely say that most people want things quickly in terms of seeing results or seeing you get started, right? The most people, and people would usually pay a premium for that timing element. I mean, FedEx, right? That's the entire business model. It's around them being able to undercut the timing for the delivery of the exact same product with their competitors. As a matter of fact, mailing something fast or mailing something overnight, it's now changed to the verb FedExing, like FedEx it to me, right? So I mean, they've done something incredible, which is recognize that that two delivery companies can deliver the same product, right? I mean, or they can deliver the same box, but if you make an entire business model around doing it faster, that's really where it plays an important role. So the other, where timing is also very present in culture, it's pizza places. I don't know if pizza places still do this, but most pizza places did this whole, hey, it'll be in your house in 30 minutes or it's free. Why? Because you were paying that premium, right, to get it quicker. Now, that pizza place may not necessarily charge more to get it faster, but they were undercutting their competition, maybe charging the same, but undercutting the competition by promising faster delivery time. So I think it's safe to say that most folks want things done quickly. I mean, there are other situations in which people want prolonged amount of time, like, a massage, for example. I think I prefer an hour massage than a 30-minute massage. That's another concept. But in most cases, in service delivery, what people really want is the notion of either starting quickly, finishing quickly, or getting the ball rolling, getting the process started rather quickly. In some cases, timing, it's also about how long you will be on the project. There are projects in which people don't necessarily want you to finish faster. Maybe people want you to stay in the project for longer, right? Because it's the safety blanket, right? Oh, if something happens in 6 months, I want to know that you're going to be there for me or with me or available or partially engaged, whatever the project may be. So timing plays a whole bunch of roles on the pricing and the relationship of all the engagements. In many cases, there are elements of time or timing that most professionals don't pay close attention to. Let me give you an example. For the most part, we start with start date of the project and completion date, right? That's kind of like, I would say that's pretty much the most broad of the definitions, right? Because the client comes to you and says, hey, on April 1st, I want to implement a new database, a new ERP system. And by May 31st, I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel that it's up and running. I mean, that's a very definite notion of timing. I want the start date and I want the end date. Now, a start date doesn't necessarily mean I want you to start working on that date. It could be I want to go live on my new database or whatever happens to be on that date. And you may have to start earlier. You may have to do some testing, some trial and error, some beta testing, I think that's what you call it on the database world. And all that stuff plays into the timing as well. So in some cases, when the clients want to start going live or start the implementation date at a particular time, you may be in this quote unquote time crunch where you have to invest a whole bunch of resources to get ready for that start date. There's also another concept of timing on projects, which is something that I've been learning over time, which is adding some provisions around, if we can deliver if you want us to deliver a specific date, we need you, the customer, to respond to us in between the project in all these little tasks and questions and requests that we may have along the way. Because in a lot of implementation professional projects, whether it's IT, accounting, QuickBooks, whatever, there's an element of the client's interaction. The client may have to input some information. They may have to test it. They may have to get some of their employees trained in a new system. And if you don't have that very clear conversation around, what are the timing expectations from the client to deliver this sort of subtask in the project, you may have an issue delivering on time at the end. And that in itself almost turns out to be one of the biggest problems with customer service, with delivering satisfaction. It's if you speak with most people on the construction business, for example, there's always that complaint. Even if they do a great job, the complaint is they took too long, right? And taking too long in a construction project has all other implications. It could cost more money to have more people on staff, more inspections. If somebody's had to move out of the premises while you're doing construction, they have to pay for a hotel or whatever, or short-term rental, whatever it happens to be. So all those timing elements affect both parties in the process. And I think that having that very long, concrete discussion, not just around beginning and end date, right, or start date or implementation date, it's all those elements of timing that can affect the timing overall, could potentially save a very dissatisfied customer if you didn't, meet that proverbial end date or delivery date.
The example of pizza delivery takes me back to my college days. I remember Domino's was, the game in town, and their promise was 30 minutes or less. And I remember we were actually excited, because we were poor college students. So we were excited when it was 31 minutes, and we'd be looking at the delivery guy, going, it's free. But what's interesting, fast forward now, and it's interesting, you really don't fast forward years, but in this sense, we jump forward a couple of decades. Now, that is no longer an advantage for Domino's. All pizza delivery places have realized it's got to be delivered hot, and it's got to be delivered quick. So now they're using timing in different ways. What has Domino's done now? Well, they now, when you place your order online, if you leave the web page open, they will actually have a little progress bar showing you the timing of your order. They will not only say this order should be delivered in roughly, 30 to 35 minutes, but they'll say, okay, we're now preparing. Now we're making the ingredient. They show you, it's like 5 or 6 segments. They're showing you that progress. So they're giving you some feedback on timing. Timing is one of the 7 T's that I talk about when I discuss the idea of giving your customer options. You mentioned that customers sometimes will have an expectation or desired delivery date or end date for the project. That becomes one of the things that you can use in your proposal, and we can talk more about that in a minute, but that's how big timing is. It's actually one of those 7 different factors that you can put into play. When you talked about construction, it reminded me that here in the town that I live in, they're building a new freshman center. And that freshman center is scheduled to open this coming August. So here we are roughly the first week in April, and they are planning to have students in that building come mid-August. Well, I've driven past that construction site, and they are still working on the outside. I hope they're working on the inside simultaneously, because I can tell they are under the gun. They are running crews 24/7 trying to get that place ready and finished. A lot of times, timing is used as an option in construction contracts. If a city or a municipality wants something done faster, they will put in a significant financial bonus to the construction company to finish early. There can also be penalties for finishing late. I'm sure that this freshman center project has some type of component set up for that. So timing is not only a competitive advantage, it's something you can use as part of your proposals, and it's seen a lot throughout different industries. You mentioned FedEx. Their slogan, of course, is when it absolutely positively has to get there overnight. We've mentioned in the past that FedEx not only pioneered next day delivery, but they went a step further and said, well, you just want it there the next day, say sometime in the afternoon, or would you like it there by 10 a.m. or even 8:30 a.m.? A lot of times the packages that come back in the afternoon at 3 that were overnight are on the same truck as the ones that come in at 8:30 or 10 a.m. They're actually, quote, spending more money for that later service, but the premium they can charge for that early delivery, that early timing, makes up for the additional cost that they bear.
Right, and timing. I mean, timing plays so many important roles in life. For example, I recently got a water heater for my pool. Right, if I get a water heater for my pool during the really hot season, right, like when I really don't need one, I could probably find the water heater a little bit less expensive, right, because they're not selling as much. But if I get one right when spring is starting, where where you get a little bit of sun, but there's some value. I think I think I ended up paying a little bit more that I could have just because I wanted it, right when I felt that winter was out. And by the way, in Florida, that's like early February. But once I felt winter was out, I was like, oh man, I got to get my pool heater. And there's so many elements of timing in so many cases. Like, for example, whenever, you need to get somewhere fast because you have an emergency and you show up to the airport last minute. Okay. And I think hotels and airlines always do this. They always save 1 or 2 spots for the people that absolutely need to get there within a couple of hours, and they would absolutely pay that premium. So it's important to just kind of keep aware that there's always going to be someone coming in needing something last minute, and those people are willing to pay more, knowing that they have to kind of skip the line and get in front of other folks to get your attention immediately, or get you to do stuff with quicker turnaround time. You were talking about construction and construction workers and stuff like that. How non-intuitive it's the concept of overtime. Like, let's pay our employees more to take longer, right? Versus rewarding them to do things faster. I mean, we almost have to figure out how to transform this whole concept, right? Like, if we can get someone to deliver the same output in less amount of time, even if they go home at 3 o'clock, and we can get to the client the output of that work quicker, there should be an negative, like a bizarro overtime bonus for doing things faster. But it's not. Our culture almost rewards, taking longer to do things. Now, granted, I mean, overtime is not always people that take longer to do things. They're just, some projects are actually just more complex, and they just require more manpower per se. But it is something that it does require a little bit of a revolution on the labor end. On the technology end, it's a little bit different. It's almost like everyone that's a technologist, that's a programmer, app designer, developer, almost everything that they do, you think about it, has to do with cutting time. I mean, any app idea that people have thought of, it almost has always to do with cutting time. And cutting time could be cutting the middleman. Sometimes cutting the middleman is not just an economic concept. Sometimes it's a timing concept, right? Because there are cases in which, you can go through a middleman and you can get a better price, but it takes longer because you have to wait for someone to then get the quote somewhere else. So people just prefer to just go straight to Amazon and get, 2-day Prime, even if they pay more, which is one of the interesting things in Amazon Prime. I thought, conceptually, I thought Amazon was less expensive than everything else. But it turns out that in groceries and office supplies, they're actually more expensive than other places. Why? Because they know that it is much faster for you to go to Amazon.com, reorder ink, hit send instead of shopping it around online. So, once they got you in with this whole 2-day Prime thing, and your business almost gets into the cycle where they look at office supplies in terms of a 2-day supply. And if and that's the timing of it, right? If I got 2 days left with the paper and ink, then it's time for me to go into Amazon. I notice how they play with that timing concept in maybe in a different perspective that most people would not have thought of. The other, and I'm going to change the perspective of this a little bit, Kirk. Timing, it's also so important when it comes to likability, relationship building, being funny, being pleasant, right? Think about when you meet someone for the first time and you're having let's say a 1-hour conversation. There are questions they can ask on the first 5 minutes that will completely mess up that potential relationship. And there are questions that if they wait, timing, if they wait maybe 30 minutes into it and it makes sense to ask that question at the time that maybe the topic came up, the conversation is a little bit more pleasant. I don't know if you kind of follow me on this one, but timing has a lot to do with relationship building and meeting people and getting folks to open up to you. If you ask the right questions in the right time, and if you make the right comments and the right jokes at the right time, then you have a much higher probability of having an enduring relationship with someone. But there are so many ways to screw up, with the same exact action in the wrong time that can screw up that relationship. What about a first date? Think about a first date. Think about trying to kiss someone on the first date. I mean, this is not business related, but think about what that could monumentally do to push that relationship forward or completely backwards. So, I mean, there's elements of timing that are not necessarily based on a project or a contract. It just has to do with your capacity to be quiet when you need to be quiet and be inquisitive when you need to be inquisitive. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're right. Timing touches so many different things. I already mentioned earlier that it's one of the 7 factors you consider when presenting options. I'll give you another example of timing when it's critical, and it's something that I think you really have to be very intentional about the context of. Once you put a proposal together and you're going to present that proposal to the customer, first of all, I strongly believe you should not ever just send a proposal to a customer. You don't want to prepare it and then just send it via email. You want to present it. And one of the key reasons for that is because when you have a formal presentation, it's so easy to do remotely now using something like GoToMeeting or Zoom, these other services, is you can control the context and the timing. Not only can you control when the meeting happens, but you can control the flow of the meeting, which there is a timing element to just walking through the presentation, the order of the elements, what the customer hears or sees first, and so forth. And I take all that in consideration when presenting a proposal. For example, I want to make sure that one of the first things we walk through early and we get agreement on is what is the value to the customer for what we're going to do. Later on, as we're walking through maybe the scope of the work or what some of the key milestones will be, I want to be able to do that without the pricing having been presented to the customer. So I put the pricing on a page later and make sure that I have to, flip to that page in the PDF or the slide deck when I'm ready to discuss it. All those things are timing. Another thing that's interesting is you don't know what the timing is in the customer's mind of what's going on in their world when you get onto a GoToMeeting call to present a proposal. They may have just had a fight with their wife. They may have had just fired an employee. They may have just come from home where their child is sick. There may be a variety of things going on that they're distracted by. Now, you can't control the timing of those things, but you can, to some degree, set the context in a formal presentation. Again, an idea of timing. If a customer is not in a great place, there's been a couple instances where I've sensed that, and I have actually suggested to the customer that we reschedule the meeting because I could just tell that it was, quote, bad timing. So there's a whole nother issue of timing that just has to do with how you present a proposal. So timing comes up again and again and again and again. But what we want to get back to, I think, is this idea of customer service with timing, and realize that you can use timing both to the customer's advantage and to your advantage. One of the things you want to bring out in the value conversation with your customer is, what is their expectation of timing? One of the things you want to know is, well, if this was a perfect world and this was a project that didn't have hiccups, which there is no such thing. All projects have hiccups or challenges. Otherwise, they wouldn't need us to help complete it. But ideally, when would they like to have it, right? And then you can not only listen to when they say the timing is important, but you can then factor that into how, again, I get back to your proposal, you can charge a premium for meeting their timing, especially in a situation where it's going to require you to maybe change or reshuffle commitments to other customers, or it's going to require more of your capacity in a short time frame. Maybe it's a rush type of project. Maybe it's, an overnight or, very quick turnaround. All those things factor in. So again, the timing from the customer, not only of the duration of the project, but also response time. You brought this up earlier. How quickly do they want you to get back to them? Sometimes you might ask a customer, well, tell me about your previous experience with the accountant. What did you like? What did you find you wished was different? If they bring up something about timing, they say, well, I wish they'd gotten back to me faster. Tell me about that. What do you mean by faster? How fast do you want a response? You've alluded to this before, I think, in the episode 2 weeks ago when we kind of did a mock value conversation. This idea of, is 4 hours fast? Is a day fast? Is 48 hours fast? Even the method. All of those things factor into timing. In fact, we have a whole concept of access level agreements that we can get into that is really largely based on this concept of timing.
Yeah, I want to comment in a couple things. So the last thing you said, you're talking about trying to get the client's priority level, try to get them to be just very honest and transparent about their priorities and the timing. How you say it and how you ask makes a difference. Like, for example, if you say something like, are you in a rush? If you ask a question, are you in a rush? Most people will translate that rush question in their mind to, oh, he's going to charge me a rush fee premium, right? So you're going to be already in a contradictory situation with your client, where no matter what you say, they're saying, oh, yep, I screwed up. I said rush, and he's going to charge me a rush fee. So that's an important thing, is like how you say and how you ask makes a big difference. Sometimes you can use the third party approach. I think yours was a perfect example. You can say, on your last accountant, how quickly did they turn around the work, and was that satisfactory for you? And then you can get basically them to talk about a third party and use that in context for you to know how quickly they need it by. I mean, you can say something like, do you need this before a certain date? I mean, you can always ask that. That's fine. Or you can say something like, do you have a specific date in mind? I mean, that's actually even better when you say you have a specific date in mind, instead of saying by a specific date. Again, because you don't want the client to think that you are using, weaponizing those answers to charge more. Although you are, and you should be always, right? You should always take advantage of the client's need to do something quicker, because it's essentially their fault, right? I mean, I think that in a world where procrastinators pay, that's a fair world, okay? Because everyone had the chance to do something earlier, right? And that is the absolute truth. And if the client decided not to do it earlier and decided to do it, closer to their deadline, whatever happens to be, they must pay a premium. I mean, that's how it works, right? I mean, that's how it works. If we drive fast in a car because we need to get to a meeting quick, and we get caught for trying to shorten our travel time, we get a ticket and we pay for it, right? If we don't file tax returns on time, IRS will charge us a penalty. If we pay a loan late, we're going to pay interest. I mean, the whole concept of time value of money. I mean, if we just put, if we insert finance and the cost of capital over time into this whole thing, you could always justify the passage of time as costing somebody something, right? I mean, most businesses have a cost of capital component, whereas, if I take longer to get paid, I may pay fees on my credit card. I may not be able to take advantage of a vendor discount. I mean, timing is just it's so part of everything that we do. But I wanted to go back to one thing that you said that I actually absolutely love, where you talked to something I don't do, which I should do, where you talked about the timing of sending a proposal. And I want everybody to really pay close attention to this, because to me, this is a big eye opener and one of the great reasons to do these type of podcasts and webinars, because you get to experience these things. If you send a proposal up front and give the client a day to think about it, and then call them back and say, what do you think? You have a potential downfall, which is the client will read the proposal and not have a chance to clarify things on the spot, which will cause them to create all sorts of alternate universes around the meaning of what they're reading. And after, you have their biases come into play and the guards are up at a specific wording that you use or something like that, and then you try to explain the proposal or discuss it, you're going to be in cleanup mode, right? Oh, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. Whereas, which I think is a genius idea, you contact the client first, you get him on a Zoom call, or you get him in a phone call and say, okay, you have 10 minutes, you have 15 minutes. Okay, here's my proposal. Let's read it together. That way you're immediately there to catch anything that wasn't, that could be misunderstood, or it could take people down into tangents. The other piece, and this is true to me too, when I get a proposal and people give me time to think about it, I also have time to research. I have time to look at the things that they propose to me and go out there and search to see what other people are saying about, the steps that I'm taking or whatever the deliverables are. And it just messes up with my head and doesn't allow me to connect with a service provider that's trying to propose, let's say, an overall project. Whereas, maybe in the proposal, you may have some flaws, like I have some clients that are larger companies that require me to put the amount of time I will be spending on sub portions of the proposal, even though they're paying for a turnkey project. Let's say it's $15,000 turnkey project, whatever. They want to know, when I break it down into maybe 6 phases, how much time is being spent on each one. And again, I could, I don't track the time. At the end of the day, it's funny. Nobody asks for that information, but because this is how the corporation does it, that's how they want it. So there are situations in which, phase 2, you estimated, 20 or 30 hours. And then on phase 3, you estimated 5 hours. And from the client's perspective, phase 2 was actually a pretty simple thing, and phase 3 was a really complicated thing. And they may just sit there and just psychoanalyze the whole thing. And then once you talk to them, they're already attacking you on one specific subsection of that proposal. So I think that regardless how you present the proposal, and I don't think it's a great thing to add time into the proposal because of many things that we have discussed. But I think even if you have to add things that maybe you don't want to, I think it's a great thing to be there at the exact same time that they're reading it, so you can respond immediately right away. And then if you have to modify it on the fly, I had one time that I created a proposal with a client with a Google Doc document. And the client, we were talking and I was adding notes to the actual live proposal on the spot while we were discussing. So we actually kind of built the proposal together. I mean, how's that for the ultimate usage of time? We're both, both what we were thinking and what we wanted to achieve was being recorded on the fly in real time as we were thinking about, what are the little changes to the proposal as I put it together at the beginning. So I thought that your idea about not allowing the client any time to think or misinterpret your proposal by giving them too much time between the reading and the meeting is actually genius. And that's something that I'm immediately going to implement myself.
So a couple things that I want to mention. We talked about on a prior episode the importance of language. And so in this discussion of timing, we're not trying to take advantage of the customer. We're simply trying to discern under the category of timing, what do they value? And then we're going to use that as one of the elements as we prepare the options in the proposal. So we're never going to use timing against the customer. However, we are going to be aware that, yes, timing in some cases will command a premium. In other cases, timing may actually command a lower price. Let me give you an example. You might have a situation where the customer's timing is a rush for you, and so you're going to charge a premium. But you can also offer them an option where maybe for you, if you're able to stretch the project out another month or two, you actually would offer a lower price because it frees up capacity for you to possibly take on other higher paying work. You talked about how airlines do this, hotels do it as well. Airlines will keep seats available for the highest paying customers who need to go at the last minute. So will hotels. I had an example of this. I was in Buffalo, New York a few years ago for a consulting engagement, and I was there during February. Well, there's no direct flights from Dallas to Buffalo, New York, and so I had to go through Chicago. Well, there was a snowstorm in Chicago and on into the Northeast that was affecting flights. Long story short, my flight from Buffalo made it in Chicago, but there were no flights leaving out of Chicago by the time I got there because my flight was actually delayed by 3 hours out of Buffalo. So I'm there in the middle of the night. I just need a place to stay. I walk into a hotel. Normally the room at a hotel like this, I won't mention the particular brand, but would have been $150 or so a night. Like $350 because they knew the timing. Now, it felt like gouging to me, so we have to be careful to avoid that. You don't want to, either by your language or by your intent, gouge or take advantage of the customer. But still, I probably would have thought, okay, $250 for this room at 2 a.m. at night, it's snowing, and there's no other hotel rooms near the airport. I probably would have been okay. $350, I don't know. I think I wound up just going on the terminal and staying there for the night. But anyway, it's another idea. But again, it's so that we find something that works for the customer, delivers what they value, but also is a fit for us. So timing works both ways. You need to consider it from both perspectives. One thing I think you had in mind when you first brought up the topic of timing was simply timing from a professional perspective. The idea that it's just professional to return emails within 24 hours, to return phone calls within a day, something of that nature. And, you may have your own figures. You may decide it's 8 hours for email or 4 hours, but, get back to people. It's just good professional courtesy to deliver things when you say you're going to deliver them. And if you can't, actually don't wait until you miss the deadline, but give the customer a heads up. I have learned through the years, I was often very nervous when I was going to miss a deadline, and I'd let it pass and I'd just wait to see if the customer noticed. Well, whether the customer says something or not, they notice, most of them. But most of the customers will also appreciate when you say, you know what, I'm going to need another couple days to get this ready for you. I know we had scheduled this for Tuesday. Do you mind if we move that meeting to Thursday? Something of that nature. Most customers will work with you. The other thing I tell customers, and talking about the professional courtesy, one of the things I tell them is we have an expected response time from them. We actually put in our proposals that, hey, if there's a delay, and you can choose the duration that you prefer, we say if there's a delay in the project of a week or more that's not on our part, that may institute a change request. Change request could be as simple as the deliverable date changes, or it could go as far as to say, you know what, we're going to need to increase the price because we're having to shift resources around because we had allocated capacity to service you and we weren't able to do that because you were non-responsive. At the same point, I would tell the customer, hey, we will work with you. If there's a death in the family, if there's other dire circumstances, sickness, etc., we will work with you. We don't want to enact that clause that talks about duration, but we do need response. And so not only do you want to ask the customer, well, when do you want to hear from me? But you need to communicate to the customer your expectations. Maybe, and a lot of times I just make it mutual. Whatever they want to ask of me, I ask them to reciprocate to me as well. One, it's easier to remember, right? It also can get confusing if you've made a guarantee, not a guarantee, but you've made a promise to say, I'll get back to you in 4 hours, but they only made one to get back to you in 8 hours. I think that mutual type of response. And sometimes customers, when I bring it up, okay, well, when, what is your response time to me going to be? Sometimes it'll actually wind up becoming kind of a compromise or negotiation. Sometimes what they originally said, they needed a faster response time from me. When they realize that I may be asking the same of them, then all of a sudden I realize, what they originally stated, they've got some more flexibility there.
Right. I mean, I do have a little bit, I have a little bit of response to what you said earlier. So yeah, so on what you said just now, which is, having, building some flexibility in time, both, writing in and stating some official flexibility or, and the human aspect of it, which, hey, let's be flexible and understanding. And then going back to the comment where you said, that I may have said or sounded like maybe I'm taking advantage of the client's timing situation. The way I think about it is like this. There's a difference between taking advantage of someone's timing situation and you creating the opportunity to serve them under that dire time situation. Okay. So an emergency room in a hospital, the operation, I don't mean like a surgery, but I mean the business operation revolves around response time. Okay. Revolves around taking advantages of someone's timing situation. That is the whole business model. And thank God and society for emergency rooms. Emergency rooms are responsible for saving a lot of people's lives. Now, are they quote unquote taking advantage of the situation? Yes, they are. But that's what the business model is. So I think that there's a fine line between, whether your business model it's around that. Because think about it, the emergency room has people sitting there waiting for somebody to walk in, even if they're not doing something. Like, in a factory, you always put workers to work and produce and clean or whatever. But like you literally will have an ER doctor, if there's nobody to look at, standing at the door, waiting for someone to come in. And this is the most expensive, one of the most expensive professionals in the world. $200 an hour or whatever it is that they cost consistently, right? 50 hours, 50, 60 hours a week that they cost the hospital. But having that person there, maybe sitting for 2 hours waiting for someone, but then being able to react and cover somebody's wound within 3 seconds of them coming in, it's life and death. So, so I think obviously the example I'm using is extreme, but I do the same thing with my business. You could think of myself as a consulting machine, and I could just take any client that comes in just to fill my calendar, fill my capacity. But I don't. I actually build 1 or 2 extra hours between appointments when I do have them. And I close gaps in my calendar. Because when someone calls in and says, hey, I have a workers' comp audit coming tomorrow, and I need to pull these 6 reports, it's extremely important for me. I can command a much higher price to be able to be available for that client to pull those reports. Then instead of a client calling me and saying, hey, within the next 6 months, I may or may not have an audit. Can you give me the best possible price for you to pull employee reports whenever you have free time? There's 2 entirely different engagements. The output is the exact same. The work that I put into, the knowledge, my experience is the exact same. But just being there, like the emergency room doctor, to solve that problem when it comes in, gives you a license, in my opinion, to, and again, take advantage of the situation, because that's the opportunity that you generated. And think about how much you have to sacrifice to get there. I mean, the whole concept of college, I believe it's almost like that. Like, I'm going to sacrifice 4 years of my life during the time that I have youth and energy, and and I can do all sorts of amazing things from the age of 19 to the age of 23. But I'm going to lock them out, and I'm going to dedicate it to learning and building my brain power, because then later on in the future, I think I can get more for that time I sacrificed and invested. So I think that, the whole world, it's throughout, it has an effect on timing and sacrificing timing and all that stuff. And before I pass it on to you, I'll just say one thing real quick. There's one video on YouTube that's called something like the marshmallow test or something like that, where there's a study that they did like 25 years ago in Japan, where they took a whole bunch of kids between the ages of like 3 and 5 or 3 and 6, and they sat them in a table, and they gave them a marshmallow, and they say, if you wait 3 minutes, and they put the time on the wall, and you don't eat the marshmallow, we'll come back and give you 3 more. But if you eat it, that's it. You don't get any more. So they actually studied, and they were looking at the patterns of all these kids. And there were some kids that were like smelling the marshmallow or licking it, trying to get an essence of it. Some kids just ate it. There was one kid that just ate the inside and made it look like he didn't eat the whole thing. I mean, obviously they're kids. Very funny video. But then what they did subsequently is they were studying these kids 15 years later. And it turned out that there was a correlation between the kids that waited the 3 minutes for the marshmallow to get 3 and their success rate. Because they discovered that early on, someone that's willing to sacrifice with timing, somebody that's willing to sacrifice immediate satisfaction for the benefit of the future, right? They understood this pretty much early on. They had the foundational elements of success. So I thought that was kind of an interesting anecdote to bring along. And I also wanted to comment on what you had said.
So do you offer your customers marshmallows for waiting?
Yes.
All right.
I actually do. I mean, just to say that, I actually do. When a client tells me, hey, can you do this for me? And I give them an option. I say, look, I can get it done within 60 days. And I'll basically do it sort of like in between my I don't want to call it spare time, but in between my gaps on my pre-scheduled projects. Or I can get it done within 2 weeks. And there's a different price. I mean, that's, you want the marshmallow, you have to wait.
One of the ideas that you mentioned when you talked about emergency room also has application to professional practices. This idea of having capacity available to handle the emergency. We talked about it a little bit with the travel industry. You brought it to medical care. It also applies to accounting and software services. I occasionally will have a customer call who has a true emergency. For example, they are trying to recover data from a backup because their hard drive crashed, or somebody accidentally deleted a bunch of data from the database, and so we have to go to a backup, or all of a sudden, they've got to migrate to a new system, whatever it is. Same thing, an auditor shows up, knock on the door. You want to have capacity for those. And you're not taking advantage of the customer by having that capacity available and by charging a premium for it. I prefer the language, you are ready to provide that service for those who need it. Think about another situation. Had a hot water heater in our home burst a few years ago. I was not too worried about what the price was that the company that came out to help us mitigate that water damage at 10 o'clock at night was going to charge. Now, yes, I have home insurance, and so I just had to worry about the deductible. But nonetheless, my main concern was timing. I needed them out right away because this was a situation where the sooner we mitigate the damage, the less not only expense is it going to be, but also it's going to affect timing of us of having to be in or out of the home, moving, repair, all of those kind of things. So having access capacity available. So that might bring up a question, and I haven't really thought through this. I'm curious what your response might be. We talked about panic season last week. Do you know of practices where they actually reserve capacity to handle last minute people trying to meet the deadline?
Most don't. Most don't. I think most firms, what they do is they take as much as possible in the queue. The ones that start pressuring around beginning of April, that absolutely must have it. Maybe they can get them to pay a little bit more if they absolutely must have it. But I don't think that most accounting firms have the culture where they give three prices, right? You bring everything the first week of January is $500. Bring it in March is $1,000. Bring it in April 10 is $10,000. And then we'll do an extension on April 18th, and I'll go down to $500. I mean, if you give somebody the options like that, the clients opt out of rushing you. I mean, it's one of those magical things. Pricing fixes everything. It is so incredible and it took me so long to realize that. I mean, I had to listen to your podcast, to Ron and Ed's podcast. I had to read so much to realize that pricing is the ultimate fixer of your timing problems. It absolutely is. If you want an employee immediately, let's say an example. You want to hire an employee that will fix your problems immediately, that you don't have to train for 6 months. Well, pricing fixed the problem. You're going to have to go to a firm that does it right and steal their star employee and pay them double to entice them to come to your company, right? That's how pricing fixes everything, right? You can't afford them. Okay, you're going to wait 6 months to a year to train them until they can actually solve problems for you, right? And then this whole element of, time is money is a different concept. But it's just pricing just fixes everything. I mean, when clients are out there rushing me, or right up front, they say, hey, I need you to do this by this date. And I know I cannot meet that date. Like, I know that date is difficult for me. But maybe I couldn't quite understand what the value was, but they were pressuring me on that date. I give them the two options. I say, I have it by this date, this price. I have it by this date, that price. And I make it so different. Like, I mean, sometimes it goes, the contrast is almost double. People are like, wait a second, why would you charge half if you do it 1 week later? I say, well, because I will literally have to hire outside contractors to help me with this, because I can't do it by myself or with my current capacity. Or I have to literally fire 6 clients to do this, right? And I love your project and I'm willing to do it. Or I have to not take new work or whatever, right? It's just, I think saying I have to go pay overtime to do this is probably the wrong approach, because then you're back into the time for money trap. But it is what most people say. Like, most people say, well, I got to pay people overtime, so I have to charge you more. Probably not the right word choice, although it's understood and pretty much people understand overtime. It's understood, but it is absolutely true. And if you have a client, look, for the most part, I think that bad customers are not bad customers because they're bad. They're bad because they have timing problems. They ask for things last minute. They pay late. I mean, it all has to do with time, right? So they ask for things last minute, or they ask too many things. They ask little things too often, or they ask the same thing over and over and over, or they pay late, or they get mad because you didn't respond within the hour. Almost all the problems with quote unquote bad customers, it's timing. It's absolutely timing. And anytime that somebody says, oh, my customer has unreasonable expectations. Well, in some cases, the unreasonable expectation is what they wanted us to create is just not possible, right? And that's different. But most unreasonable expectations, it's always timing. It is absolutely always timing. They expected me to respond within the hour. They expected me to get the beta done within the week. They expected me to be available, to have a customer service department that's available 24/7. It's almost all timing.
One of the things you hinted at is the idea that if your business model is based on billable hours, you are really not in a position to use timing to both the customer's advantage and to yours. You're not in a position, because you're selling hours. And so literally the conversation with the customer and the documents you're putting in front of them, a lot of it's based on the inputs, which is quote time, but you can't not, because you have a business model based on time, you really should shift to a business model that where you could base it on timing. And I don't think you can use timing as part of the options and pricing when your business model is based on time. So how's that for, kind of juxtaposition of words? You have to decide, are you going to have a business based on time or based on timing? I'd much rather have it based on timing because it's much easier to set and meet expectations for timing when you're not focused on time.
Wow. I think, Kirk, one of my eyes is tearing up. I think we just created a really important quote is, we're not in the time business, we're in the timing business. And that is so, it's just incredibly insightful in my opinion. That's it. It takes time to, it's funny how it takes analyzing something simple as time to realize that's exactly what it is, right? We are, if you're a database builder, if you're a technology consultant, if you're an accountant, if you're a tax accountant, if you're an ERP integrator, you're in the timing business. All you're there to do is either reduce the client's time in which they perform their functions, reduce their time in which they deliver the product and satisfy their customers, reduce the time that they spend on mundane things that they don't care about, giving them back time to invest in their customers and develop their business, and giving them time to take a vacation. That's pretty much what you're in business for. If you're a technologist, an accountant, you're there to improve your client's capacity to control their timing. That's amazing.
Well, and think about it. When you enter into an engagement with a customer, they are transferring responsibility for timing from themselves to some degree to you. In other words, instead of them being solely responsible for the timing for tax return, business planning, income, balance sheets, etc., it's a shared timing. And you want to explore what is their expectation of that shared timing. You also want to consider, can you meet that timing and how's that going to impact your business? Because timing works both ways. You need to understand the customer's expectations, but then you also need to understand how that's going to affect your business. Timing for the customer is very much a duration issue. It can be, depending on how you run your business, a capacity issue for the professional. And when we talk about capacity, again, I don't want to get into the idea of billable hours, but you don't want to overcommit. In fact, you always want to have capacity available, because something you need to keep in mind is that if you're running at 100% or even close to 100% capacity, your work is going to suffer. You're actually not going to do your best work. You actually do your best work when you're not running at high capacity. You're running at, I call moderate capacity, say in the 70 to 80% range. That's when I think you're going to do your best work. And having excess capacity, not only available for those emergency situations, which gives you a premium pricing opportunity, but also not running at 100% capacity just so you can do your best work. Again, a timing issue.
No, it's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah, this was fascinating, Kirk. I knew we were gonna go from philosophy to practicality back to philosophy. But yeah, that's it is everything. And to cap it all off, you mentioned earlier, which we didn't get into too much detail of, which probably we should, it's how timing, it's one of the options of pricing. Where when you scope out a professional service, where most of the work it's done really with your brain, with your knowledge, and with your experience. That delivery time, or by when you will give them the result, or how quickly you can deliver results, or how often, because sometimes engagements are recurring, how often you will deliver results, how often you will be available for them, available with them. That in itself, it's almost one of the most important pieces. Most people think that the scope definition, what I will do and what I will not do, right? And scope creep is the most important piece of an engagement. And I actually thought that until today. I believe now more and more that the option of timing, it's basically the one option to rule them all, right? It is the one option that pretty much encompasses pretty much everything. So, we will probably dedicate an episode on comparing timing with the other options. Can you mention them real quick, the other 7, just to add some context?
Oh, put me on the spot. So tailoring, talent, timing, terms, meaning payment terms, training, which I actually prefer the term education. There's probably a couple others. So I think I can get you 5 off the top of my head.
Okay. So the premise is that the 4 or 5 that you mentioned, which all start with T's, by the way. I think that was probably done deliberately to make it easy. So we mentioned talent, timing, training, or education, or I guess transference, tailoring, terms, and 2 more that we can't think of, which is okay. When you actually break those 7 options down, or at least we'll start with those 5, and you use them to create dimensions of your service, of your product, of your package, of the bundle, of the different types of projects, those allow you to create a frame around the pricing and creating at least 3 options, 3 packages, and as those options are executed or not executed, or how much of it you need, how much tailoring do you have to do around your practice to be able to serve the client, how much training or transfers of knowledge is involved during the engagement, the timing, which we obviously beat the dead horse around it. All those elements allow, I think, help you frame around pricing. So I wanted to just kind of wrap it up with that. And with that, Kirk, I'm all done with. We're out of time, and and I'm all done with that. You have any last words of wisdom?
Nope. I think we killed timing in this issue. So I'll see you next week.
I'll see you in a week. Bye.